start. All right, ladies and gentlemen, are we ready to get this show on the road? Oh, folks, in the tradition of call and response, I'll ask that question once more. Are we ready to get this show on the road? Hey, wait for me when I ask you that question before the spontaneous response. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Social Enterprise Conference 2017. My name is Brett DeHoot. I shall be your MC here today. Among you, the elite of the social enterprise sector. Is that a fair characterisation of the people gathered in this room, by the way? The elite? Well, you found the venue, you got here on time, that'll do. Folks, this might be the one day of the year where you don't have to explain precisely what a social enterprise is to anybody. And since we have so many insiders, I thought, and I hope this is okay with the organisers, we might throw out the agenda and spend the day defining precisely what a social enterprise is. Who's up for that? Fine, we'll stick to the agenda as given. You know what you are, you know what you're here for, and I presume one of the things you're here for is to meet the other players in the social enterprise sector. Is that fair enough? You're here to ruthlessly network? Some of you, I imagine, might be looking for capital, for funding, for investors. Would that be fair to say? Anyone here fond of money, fond of investors? Of course you are. A little word to the wise. I've had a look through the guest list. Foundations are here. Ian Potter, Westpac, Jack Brockhoff. I know what you're thinking. That's great, Brett. I know they're here, but which ones are they precisely? Here's a little tip. They are among us, but you can identify them because they're wearing a top hat, tails, and a monocle. And they are holding with them a large Hessian bag shaped like a pumpkin with a dollar sign on it. It's very heavy. It's full of gold sovereigns. And if they choose you to invest in, they'll just throw, or have their manservant, throw those sovereigns at you. That's how you know you've been selected. I really do like the balance of this program. There are events that I MC that are all keynotes all day long. This is not one of those events. Yes, a couple of keynotes in the morning. Perspectives from banking and finance, and a Singaporean perspective from an organisation that I can barely get my little head around. Tong, where are you? You can explain all after morning tea. I know you want to meet each other, so that's why we've created the World Cafe. Then it's a bit of a choose-your-own-adventure experience in the afternoon with some concurrent sessions, quite specialised. And then we're going to gather together in this room in the afternoon to sort of hash out what the hell we've learnt today, where to from here. And then, of course, it's networking drinks. Does this seem like a reasonable use of your time here today? Yes. Folks, we're really not as familiar with the call and response thing as I wish. You could be anywhere here, I think Jay-Z once said, you can be anywhere in the world, but you're here with me, and I appreciate it. Ho! So, folks, we are here together, and I do advise you to follow the 1-1-1 rule. Pick up a tool, a trick, a technique that you can put into action immediately. Meet one new person, or more, of course, and ensure that you make one contribution, because I think you can get this much from today, or that much from today. We urge you to meet, to connect, to contribute, to talk, even, heaven forbid, to challenge my authority, though if you do, I'll have to ask you to leave. So, we have experts among us, and I think, perhaps properly, formally, to welcome us and kick us off today, I'd like to make welcome to the lectern the Director for the Centre for Social Impact at Swinburne University, Professor Joe Barraquette. Please make it very welcome.
I'm always the straight woman who comes after the funny man at this event. I'd like to acknowledge that this is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Pay my respects to the relationship between people and country, and pay my respects to country itself. I'd also like to acknowledge all traditional owners of the land who live and work in this region, and all Indigenous people who are with us today. As our MCs just said, CSI Swinburne, or the Centre for Social Impact, we must start with the golden rule of no acronyms. The Centre for Social Impact Swinburne is very pleased to be the physical host once again, the second year running, and a major sponsor, the third year running, for the National Social Enterprise Conference. We're delighted that you're here, able to use our space. It is a place of learning and a place of innovation and business development, and all of those things are things that you're doing today, so we're really happy to welcome you. I'd particularly like to acknowledge Social Traders for their leadership in convening this conference on an annual basis and their stewardship in the social enterprise community. I just wanted to make a couple of comments and then really just welcome you and encourage you to have a good day. But my comments for this morning as I read the newspaper are that we're living in a time of growing inequality and increasing public anger and awareness about that inequality. And it seems to me that when people aren't venting their anger through making populist political choices or throwing bombs at each other, the other thing that they're doing is really cleaving to a sense of belonging and looking for opportunities for community. My nighttime job, I don't call it my volunteer job, it's my nighttime job, and I'm smiling at my CEO over here, is as chairperson of Ceres Community Park. For those of you who are from Victoria, many of you would know that Ceres has got a 35-year history as being a site of community, and we're very aware of the demands for community that are growing all the time. We've got, at the moment, our communications manager did a count recently and realised that we've got more than 1 million people a year interacting with Ceres, either physically on the site or through our online community. People are looking for that kind of community. I know that in the organisations that you work in, many of you are in the business of creating spaces of belonging for the communities that you serve and for your beneficiaries. But I also know, and I don't want to put it down or anything, but I know from the research that I do and the many conversations I have with social entrepreneurs, both through the research and through our graduate education programs, that you operate in hybrid spaces, and sometimes your own sense of professional belonging can be challenged by that. One of the things I've noticed with this conference each year is that this is one of your places of belonging. This is a place where you energise each other, energise yourselves, learn from each other, and I really hope that today is just that for you, an opportunity to make a deal, to make a friend, to influence someone and have a really good time. So welcome once again to Swinburne, and all the best for a great day.
Thank you, Joe. By the way, I mean, Melburnians might presume everyone else is a local only. Who are our interstate visitors here today who have travelled? Whoa, that's probably the majority of you. As a born and bred Melburnian, special Melburnians, can we make these people very welcome? At a lot of conferences, I'm always delighted that people are so happy to be in Melbourne, and of course one of the great associations with Melbourne is coffee, and I had a couple of interstaters come up to me before and say, look, I don't want to look like a rube when I order my coffee, what should I order? And Melbourne has a reputation as being pretty fussy about the coffee. And, what do they say? If your order's more than 4 words, you're part of the problem. So, I will just recommend you order whatever I order, and it's just a down-to-earth, long macchiato served with a small batch heritage breed single estate fair trade coffee bean. And I just have that with a flask of almond milk, served warm because I'm not an animal, and sugar-free because I'm watching my fructose, to which I add my own cinnamon and honey to taste, just like any other working Australian. So, interstaters, just walk up to any barista and order that. It will not be a problem, I guarantee it. And if you do, please tell me beforehand because I'd like to watch. Now, ladies and gentlemen, social traders, of course, have been the driving force behind this event. One of the driving forces behind social traders is its deputy chair, Patricia Edwards. Please make her very welcome.
Thank you, Brett, and thank you, Joe. I've had my 2 long blacks so that I meet the minimum word standard, so thank you. And I've made 4 friends already this morning, and that was to get me from where I parked my car into this room safely. So universities are definitely very innovative, and part of your learning is navigating your way around. So thank you very much. I'm glad I'm here. And we place at Social Traders a very high value. I've known Joe, I think, more than a decade now, which is lovely to be back with many familiar faces and many new faces in the room. So welcome on behalf of Social Traders. The relationship that we have with Joe personally, with the Centre and with Swinburne is very important to Social Traders. So we thank you very much for being with us here again to stage this conference. Formally, on behalf of social traders, ladies and gentlemen, it's my role and pleasure to welcome you to the conference today. This is a very significant activity for social traders each year, and it does remain very true to the purpose of the gathering and the bringing together of those who support and want to develop and grow a deeper awareness of social enterprise in Australia. The role it can play in the mainstream economy, it's been very exciting to be part of that journey now for a long time. And I think when I use the word ecosystem to describe what's been happening and what's been created and where we are today, I think that's going to be a very important part of the conversation today. Attending today, there are operators of social enterprise, both large and small. We've got academics and students of social impact and change. We've got representatives of not-for-profit organisations who are already operating social enterprise or who are considering starting one. We've got those who are in the intermediary area and development organisations such as social traders that work on the capacity building component. And we know and continue to understand that that's a critical part of all of this work, as is the investment stream that it's very pleasing to see is there and growing and far more aware now of what we need to be doing to really grow the impact of social enterprise. We've got government policymakers, a special welcome to them, who are, after some important conversations and narrative and engagement with organisations such as social traders, are now very aware of the opportunity that social enterprise creates for their work. And of course, welcome to the private sector. Perhaps where I come from and feel most familiar, it's great that you're here today understanding what the opportunity might be for your work around social impact. We're all here today around that theme of activating Australia's social enterprise economy to deliver its full potential. I hope we can answer that, perhaps what that full potential looks like by the end of the day. And progress against that goal has been very much boosted by the forward-thinking policymakers in our government. In particular, and a standout in this area is the Victorian government, who earlier this year, if you aren't aware, please do look it up. I'm sure it'll be referenced today. And that's Australia's first statewide social enterprise strategy. And by being the first government in Australia to develop that framework for social enterprise, the Victorian government really is creating an environment where social enterprise can develop and grow and ultimately claim an even bigger share of the mainstream economy. Our hope, of course, is that other governments will follow, and it's very pleasing to understand and know that the Queensland State Government is actually very deep into their thinking and their response in this area. So watch this space, perhaps, is the right way to think about it. Through the work of the Victorian Government and their commitment really about the ecosystem that we're building, it's quite an exciting time to be involved, and there is a really healthy demand for social enterprise products and services. Both the public and the private sectors are recognising that the tangible social outcomes, most notably in employment generation, can be achieved by including social enterprise services into their procurement. And it's an area of great and deep interest for social traders, and many of you in the room here today. We've been playing a really critical role in that procurement space for well over 12 months, really, and we've got some very bright minds working on that with us. That's resulted in around $20 million worth of contracts being issued to social enterprise. And we've certified almost 200 social enterprises now across Australia to take advantage of these new market opportunities. And we know they're there. We know that they're real, they're quantifiable, and they're most notably linked to the $30 billion planned and committed expenditure on major infrastructure projects. So thinking about that as a real opportunity right in front of us is very exciting. And while social enterprise in Australia is still growing and maturing, the phases research, call myself out, fortunately I had the full words there, Finding Australia's Social Enterprise Sector, that research that was launched at this conference last year is really demonstrating how the current social enterprise community is developing. It's a blend of mature and early stage, 40% and 34% retrospectively, who've been operating on the 10 years or more scale, or even into that new emerging space of around 2 to 5 years. And these are important characteristics. Maturity and growth are exactly what the ecosystem needs. We think about it as the pipeline, and that's really what we need to keep building and nurturing together. The diversity of people here today is testament to the work of the collective hosts, in particular Social Traders. Thank you to David and his team. Welcome Mike Hurst, CEO of Bendigo and Adelaide Bank, and of course Tong Yi, Managing Director of the Thought Collective in Singapore. Thank you both for being here, for being prepared to share your insights. And I hope that it's a really exciting Q&A session that will follow each of your conversations. Before handing back to Brett, once again, thank you to Swinburne for hosting us. Thank you to the Victorian Government as our major event partners. I'd also like to thank the Federal Department of Employment, the English Family Foundation and Australia Post as our event partners, and the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation as an event supporter. Without you, collectively, these events just don't happen. And if any of you have been involved in the creation and execution of these events, I'm sure you'll be sitting there knowingly just how important these events are to do well and to get the right people in the room. So thank you all for joining us on a very typical Melbourne day. Enjoy. Thank you, Brett.
Thank you, Patricia. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have a ministerial announcement. Please roll the video tape. My specific instruction was to roll the tape. We are just simply displaying it without rolling it. That's technical stuff. It's probably way over your head. I get it. But
I'm so sorry I can't be with you today. As Parliament's sitting, I need to be in Spring Street. From the outset, can I congratulate Social Traders for organising this conference. We are very lucky in Victoria to have one of Australia's leading social enterprise development organisations in our midst to organise such a wonderful event and do the great job that they do. Can I also recognise Swinburne University? Swinburne University, of course, do a terrific job, and they will be an important partner for us all in relation to the work that they will do, particularly in the area of research, to enrich our understanding of social enterprises in Victoria and the opportunities that will exist going forward. We are so fortunate in Victoria to lead in so many different areas, but one area in particular that we should be particularly proud of is our leadership in terms of social enterprises. Victoria is the nation's home to social enterprises, and what an incredible job social enterprises do in order to create a sense of inclusion and opportunity for so many people, an opportunity to work, an opportunity to engage, an opportunity to build confidence. We are the home of about 5,000 social enterprise organisations. That is creating thousands of opportunities for ordinary Victorians every day to participate, to feel a sense of worth. That's why the Victorian Government is so keen to partner with the social enterprise sector in Victoria. Through our recent budget, we have committed more than $10 million to support the growth and capability and strength of our social enterprise sector. And I, as a Minister, have been so very fortunate to visit some wonderful social enterprises across Victoria. Yarraview Nursery, for example, out at Mount Evelyn, they employ about 100 people, many of them with intellectual disabilities or acquired brain injuries, planting the seedlings, the grasses that we've been using at some of our level crossings. Just fantastic to visit and launch our strategy out there and meet some of the workers who love their work, who feel really engaged in what they're doing. Or to another organisation, OC Connections in Oakley, to understand what they're doing and the opportunities they're providing to meet people, for example, who are working at a car wash, but really feeling pride in their work. It's really very heartwarming. But to other organisations, for example, such as Good Cycles down in Docklands, they've got a contract to service all of the blue bikes that we see around town that our tourists use to get around. But they are providing opportunities for young people, for example, coming out of our youth justice system to engage, to learn a new skill, importantly to restore their confidence and use it as a pathway to regaining an opportunity to participate in something more meaningful in life. We recognise that some of our biggest challenges, such as homelessness, disadvantage and unemployment, cannot be resolved by government alone. We need the support of the community. You and your organisations play such a significant role in terms of creating opportunities for new and better quality of life for so many. That's why today I'm really pleased to announce that the Victorian Government will contribute $25,000 to social traders and the Australian Social Enterprise Bursary Fund to allow 14 participants to travel to New Zealand later this year to participate in the Social Enterprise World Forum. This will be an opportunity for our best and brightest to join those from around the world to exchange, to share ideas, but importantly come back to Victoria and strengthen what we do here. We want to lead, but we need you to assist us in that quest. And I'm confident that this small investment that we will announce today, or are announcing today, will be an important step in the very strong desire that the Victorian Government has to strengthen the capability of Victoria's social enterprise sector. So with that, enjoy your conference today. It's a great opportunity to share ideas, to network, but importantly, come out of a conference like today with a renewed or refreshed desire to do even better and continue the leadership role that Victoria plays so proudly in social enterprises. Thank you.
What a polite audience you are. He wasn't even in the room. You do realise that was pre-recorded. Remember the pause at the start, those edits? He's not here. Very polite, I like that. You're well reared, you humans. If you haven't noticed something, we are predominantly a paperless event. Isn't that nice to be part of a paperless event? Less waste, less carbon, less hassle, less costs too to our organisers, which helps us keep profits. I mean, costs low and profits high. Well, profits low. Now, if you haven't already, you should download the app. It gives you all the details you need of our speakers, of the locations, of the concurrent sessions, and it gives you the opportunity to exchange some messages about yourself with other conference goers. I was perusing the app this morning. Rada Stone, where are you, Rada? Hands up. A special warm welcome to Rada. Hello, Rada. I noticed that you had messaged the entire conference, I think yesterday. You're from Candelo Bulk Whole Food Co-op. I heard a bit of news about Whole Food during the week. You were acquired by Amazon for $16.8 billion. Congratulations. That's it, right? Not so much. I note that your organisation uses a consensus decision-making protocol. Does that actually work in the real world? And before you answer that, do you have to have a little chat with your co-workers? Rada, I'm not really interested in your replies. Rada, and because you're so ensconced in the room I can't get to you, quite seriously, you did take the opportunity to write quite a bit about your organisation. What are you hoping to get out of today? Shout it out loud, shout it out proud. Excellent. And before we go to those networking drinks tonight, I'm going to ask some of you to present in about a sentence or two about what you would like to find from your colleagues, what information you need, what advice, what experiences, what you have to offer, what you have to give, what you wish to get at the networking drinks. But enough of that. Rada, lovely to have you with us. And by the way, Patricia mentioned this is a maturing industry, but it's relatively new. Is there anyone who's been in the social enterprise sector for less than 12 months? Hands up. Hands up loud and proud. That's quite, ooh, that's an increasing percentage off you. Welcome to the family. Some might describe it as a cult. It's lovely to have you here. And we'll be having the initiation rites tonight at midnight on the banks of the Yarra. All the instructions have been placed on your pillow in a black envelope. Anyway, never mind. You know, it might strike some people as somewhat surprising that we've got a leading banker as our opening keynote presenter. I'm talking about Mike Hurst, of course, CEO of Bendigo and Adelaide Bank. But Bendigo and Adelaide Bank is not your usual bank. Australia is not so fond of the banking sector, it would be fair to say, Mike. In fact, those of you might be too young to remember, in the year 2000, bank bashing was an exhibition sport at the Olympics. But Bendigo is different. They have created what might be described as one of the world's largest social enterprises, although many people wouldn't think of it as that because it's not a coffee cart. So, what is different about them is that it is fundamentally baked in, to use a modern parlance, to the business model to contribute and contribute again to the community. And it's the more we bank with the bank, the more the community receives. I know they're here in large numbers, Bendigo Bank. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute delight to have him here. Ladies and gentlemen, please make Mike Hurst very welcome.
Well, thanks very much, Brett. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here today. As I look around, I see some people who I know here from both the bank and other things that I'm involved with. One observation I'd make, Brett, is that you and I are both overdressed for the occasion. I know how I got it wrong because I'm really not sure what a social enterprise is definitively.
No one does, so let's spend the day discussing it.
I don't know what your excuse is. So, my brief today is really just to talk to you about the community bank model, how it came about, some of the things that we've worked through over time, and as I worked through that process, I really started to wonder, you know, what is community bank? Is it really a social enterprise? Is it part of the new economy? Is it a shared value model? How does it all work? And I went to the Social Traders website to have a look to see exactly how social traders define themselves. So if you stick around, Brett, you'll see the answer to all this. And I think the key things that stuck out for me were that it defines social enterprise as businesses that trade to intentionally tackle social problems, improve communities, provide people access to employment training, or help the environment. And they say that those enterprises are commercially viable businesses, which I think is very important. But they exist to benefit the public and the community rather than shareholders and owners. And you know, I think that's an interesting point of difference, perhaps, to the community bank and some of the things we do. But I want to test with you guys whether or not community bank really is a social enterprise. And I think at the end of it, we might just have a little vote. And I know there's some people from community bank, some very long-standing people in the community bank network down here. So when we have that vote, maybe look to them to get the lead about whether or not it is a community enterprise. There are three particular characteristics on the website around what a community enterprise is. They are that they're driven by a public or community cause, be it social, environmental, cultural or economic, that they derive most of their income from trade, not donations or grants, and they use the majority, at least 50% of their profits to work towards their social mission. So if we use those 3 points as our measures, I'd like to take you through the community bank story, and maybe at the end we'll have a better view of whether or not it fits into that category. The genesis of community bank can be traced to two different parts of history, and they're a fair way apart, those two things. The first of these is over 165 years ago in Bendigo, where a group of miners got together and formed a terminating building society to build houses for those miners. They all applied their funds and then drew by lot a number that would determine who got a house built next. That initiative was true to the very first purpose of banks when they were first formed in Italy. And that truth is that everybody should benefit from a financial transaction. The investor who provides the funds, the borrower, the bank shareholders who bear the risk of the borrower not paying, and society itself. When banks were first formed, they were formed to feed into the prosperity of society, not off it. To accept cash from people who had excess amounts and no opportunity to invest it, and lend it to those who had the opportunity but didn't have the cash. And in doing that, they charged the borrower a little more than what they paid the depositor, and that margin went to the shareholders who took the risk. It was a win-win-win for all of those participants. But importantly, society benefited as well, because people gained employment, houses were built, businesses were established, and public infrastructure was funded. So that worked particularly well in early banking for one other reason. Banks were formed in communities where the depositors and the borrowers lived next door to each other. And therefore they had a common interest in seeing their communities prosper. So that time in history provided a real purpose for our organisation that still exists today. It's fundamental in the DNA of what we do. Now, we have a saying at Bendigo Bank that goes, good for customers, good for community, good for bank, in that order. The second point in history that's important to the community bank is the 1990s. That was a particularly challenging time in the banking sector in Australia. In the early 80s, there's been a lot of mergers as banks decided they needed to get bigger for economies of scale, and that actually proved to be a pretty good move, because around 84 the Hawke government deregulated the financial industry in Australia. A lot of new entrants came in, more competition, and so having that economy of scale really held the local banks in good stead. However, as we went through a period of astronomically high interest rates, asset prices really increasing, lots of credit being pumped into the economy, we ended up with the stock market crash of 87 and then the recession that we had to have in the 1990s. And in that time, in the recession that we had to have, there was lots of corporate collapses. It's well documented now that one of the major banks was very much on its knees, and the capital strength of the industry was really challenged. In response to that, each of those banks, and every bank in Australia really, had to make decisions about how they were going to survive. And one of the things that they decided to do was significantly reduce their branch networks. And you can see from this slide, in 1991 there were nearly 7,000 branches in Australia. By 2000 we were down to under 4,800. So, almost a 30% drop in branches. But it wasn't so much the fact that we lost branches that caused the problem. It was really a lot about the way the branches were selected for closure that created community angst. You see, it wasn't done in a way that made economic logic for communities that lost their branch. Profitable branches were closed along with those that were struggling. This particularly happened in small communities, in rural communities, where banks decided that it was okay for those communities to just travel to the nearest regional centre to be able to do their banking. The problem with that, though, was that when communities went to those regional centres to do their banking, they also decided to buy their groceries there, to go to the butcher there, to do all their services there. And before too long, a lot of these communities, these small towns, started to struggle. And there was a lot of community angst built up around that. And it wasn't just happening in small towns, it was happening in suburban areas, and really people were starting to say, well, if we let this happen with our bank, then it's going to happen with all of our businesses, and before too long we won't have a commercial hub to our town. So two small towns in the Wimmera in Victoria, Rapanya, where my mum happened to be born actually. That was a thing that's been commemorated on a plaque there, she tells me, but I've been there 5 times and never seen it. And Minyip, had suffered that same fate of having their banks taken away. So the leaders in that town got together and said, what are we going to do? And the decision was made to head down to Bendigo to see the then CEO of Bendigo Bank, Rob Hunt, and tell him that he had to come to those towns and open a Bendigo Bank branch. So Rob listened to what they had to say and, sort of said, well, I don't know why I would come to your towns and open a bank if nobody else can make that work there. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll come up and I'll meet with all of the townspeople and I'll have a listen to what they've got to say, and then we'll see what we do. And so he went up, they held a town meeting. While that was going on, Rob was taking note of how many people were there, and it was a packed house. And he said to them, how many of you banked with the ANZ, which was the last bank to leave town? And about, unsurprisingly, a quarter of the people put their hands up. And he said, well, I'm not coming here to bank a quarter of you. So if we're going to do this, we're going to do it in a way that engages all of you to be part of this, and a way that has you putting as much skin in the game as it does us. And on the back of that, a working group was formed between the community and the bank, and they set about establishing the community bank model. And how that model works, I've just got to let you into one little secret here. These slides were prepared for me by somebody in Adelaide. I wrote the speech. The speech and the slides didn't meet until this morning.
How are they getting along?
Yeah. So I'm sort of winging this. I generally don't like using slides, and whenever I have to talk to the staff or whatever, and they know I've got slides and they know what they are, it's like a pantomime. Every now and then they yell out, the slides, the slides. So if that happens, just say so. So as a result of that, the group got together and they decided, well, how is this thing going to work? And what they came up with was a model that required broad community support for the local community bank. So typically we like to see about 400 individual shareholders become a member of the community bank. Nobody's allowed to hold more than 10% of the stock on issue. The community's responsibility is to aggregate the local banking business and make sure that that's transacted in the local community bank. Every community in Australia has this asset called banking business, which they don't earn anything from. It's just being spread across a whole lot of different providers, with the benefits of that going to shareholders spread throughout the country. This model is about aggregating that banking business, channeling it through the local community bank to derive an income for the benefit of that community. 80% of the profits that are made by the community bank have to go back into community benefit. The other 20% of those profits go to shareholders. The community's responsible for running the local branch, the cost of doing that, promoting the community bank in the area, looking after the governance model of that company. The bank's responsible for the capital, taking on the risk on the balance sheet, all of the systems, the processes, all of the legal stuff. So we figure that a fair split for that is about 50-50 of the revenue, and that's how the business got started. It's been a pretty good success, to be honest. See, there you go. There's one of those slides that snuck away. Now it's not going anywhere. It's been a pretty good success, to be honest. Today there are 320, almost, community bank branches operating across Australia, and there's as many operating in the cities of Melbourne and Sydney and our other capital cities as there are in rural areas. Along the way, though, something changed in respect of how community banks were being formed. We went from that time of community angst around branch closures and the loss of banking facility and then the drift of other commercial businesses to regional centres, to communities starting to look at what was being achieved through the community bank model and starting to build their own community banks to provide that revenue source for community benefit and community viability. And today, and probably for the last 4 or 5 years, the majority of community banks that get opened in communities that already have 1, 2, 3 or 4 other banks. That means it's a really hard job for these mainly volunteer directors to promote that business, to build that revenue stream, to help those communities be successful. And really it's those community bank directors that are probably the heroes of this story, not necessarily the Bendigo Bank. Through doing that work, that advocacy, they've got the community bank branches up to a size of about 34 billion in loans and deposits. There's more than 1 million customers who bank through Community Bank, and in the 19 years it's been operating, it's returned $165 million in community benefit, and that amount's growing at about $20 million a year. There's been 1,500 jobs created, around $50 million is spent in those communities each year in wages and obtaining services locally, and all of those things have a positive impact on the microeconomies of those communities because of the multiplier effect that that spend has. These profits have been responsible for building community centres and health services. They've bought fire trucks and community houses. They've funded nursing and student scholarships. Hundreds of sporting teams wear jumpers with Bendigo Bank on their chest. And you wouldn't go to an oval or a netball court or a tennis court, certainly in country Victoria and often in other states where there isn't a Bendigo Bank sign on those fences. I think the next step in Community Bank, though, is a pretty exciting one, and that is where communities are providing the seed funding for initiatives that is then matched by local government. They then take that to state government where it's doubled again and federal government where it's doubled again. And that benefit occurs because governments know if the community's prepared to put in their own money to build a facility or a health service or whatever it might be, then it's going to be something that is valued by that community. And so they're more than prepared to match that funding because they know it's not funding that's being wasted. The return on equity for the leading community banks is pretty good. You know, the top few are earning 40% per annum, which is significantly greater than the 10% that we earn. But it's taken a long time for them to get to that space. There's equally those who are struggling. You know, when community banks start off, they're a start-up business like anybody else. In the early years, they struggle with debt, they worry about whether or not the business is going to take off. You know, those concerns about whether or not we're going to be able to return dividends to shareholders, in fact, make their capital whole at any stage, are genuine concerns. But of course, nothing ever gets done without those sort of concerns and worries. And every organisation, when it starts, has got to worry about those things. But persistence, continuing to tell the story, continuing to put back into the community are things that eventually drive their success. From our viewpoint, it's been, you know, an interesting journey. I think when we started this, if we thought there'd be, someone had said to us, you know, you're going to have 320 odd branches one day in this model, we would have said, you've got to be kidding. You know, it started on the back of an envelope in country towns and has really gained momentum. From our perspective, it's been a fantastic thing to be involved in. We've been able to expand our branch network in a way that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to. We wouldn't have had the capital on our own to have a nationally operating network today. It's also, though, reinforced that initial DNA of the organisation around our purpose. And I think that's really important for us. It's something that we need to be telling more people about, and we need to be telling that story in a way that engages the community to become more involved with our organisation. Because what I hear a lot is, oh yeah, Bendigo Bank, love what they do. It's fantastic community stuff, really good. Do you bank with us? No, you wouldn't be able to do my banking, you're a community bank. Well, that's not true. We have got every capability that anyone could ever want. You know, our business bank is about $7 billion. We own Rural Bank, which is an agri-business bank. It has about 10% of the agri-market in Australia. Our small business banking area is as good as anyone going around. But we need to be out there telling that story, like all of you do, around how doing business with us is doing good for the community. If we want to have a think about the measures of success that we think about when we're considering community bank, it's these. In 90 cases, we're the only bank in town. And that's really important to us because we're helping those towns remain viable and sustainable. Around 3/4 of the branches are continually in profit. Those that aren't are the newer ones that are still coming through, struggling with those issues that I spoke about before, the typical issues that startups have. Importantly, and I think it gets missed a little bit, we've been building skills in those communities around corporate governance and helping run a big business in a small way. And those skills can be applied right across the community. And I think that it's not a tangible thing that you can put a dollar amount next to, but it's a really important thing for community. I think one of the major things that we're most proud of, though, is that ability to now leverage the community bank contribution with government and others to build facilities for these communities. So we've all probably heard about Triple P, so public-private partnership. We think that there's a real opportunity for private community partnership where governments, companies and community come together to increase the viability and sustainability of those communities. The final observation I'd like to make is that we're now starting to get to a point where we don't know what branches are going to be doing in banking going forward. You know, we have more people transacting daily on their phones than we do have in our branches. It's been a really huge change in the last 5 years. So you sit there and you go, well, what role is the branch going to have going forward, and what does that mean for our business? Well, I think in the next 10, 15 years, branches are going to be required because people want to sit down and see the whites of the eyes when they're doing complex transactions. They want to understand who they're dealing with, mainly because they want to know that they've got someone they can talk to if they get into trouble. So that's going to continue to be really important. But if you get to the point where everything's being selected by somebody touching their phone or touching their screen, and I was listening to some of our community bank partners in Queensland the other day, and one of the chairs up there was saying that she's got 3 millennials living in her house. She certainly looked tired. And she was saying that they swap their banking at the drop of a hat. The bank annoys them, they just go online, bang, swap to another bank, just straight on their phone. So what is it that's going to get people to select you when all they're doing is looking at the screen to see the prettiest colours? Well, clearly it's what they know about you, what they understand about your motivation, why it is that you're in business and the things that you're trying to achieve. And I think the community bank model absolutely sits at the heart of that for us, and that is going to underwrite this business model into the future as we go along. So when we sit down and think about those 3 things that I talked about at the start about whether or not community bank is a social enterprise, I think you can tick off most of those boxes. Each branch, or the establishment of each branch, has been driven by a social and economic cause. There's no doubt about that. It either started from a loss of bank branches over a period of time, or as it is today, people wanting to earn a revenue stream for their community to make it a better place to live. Every single one of them derives all of their income from trade, not from grants and donations. And they use the majority, in this case 80%, of their profits to work towards a social mission. So on that basis, you would say, yes, this is definitely a social enterprise. But there's one thing that just nags at me a little bit about whether or not that's true, referring back to the definition I spoke about at the start. And that's the bit about social enterprises being commercially viable business existing to benefit the public and the community rather than shareholders and owners. You see, we think community banks doing both those things. It's not an either-or for us, or even one over the other. From that perspective, maybe we're more of a shared value model. For those of you who aren't familiar with shared value, and I'd reckon probably everybody in this room is, I'll just give you a little primer. The GFC globally was a very big event. Australia didn't really have the GFC that the rest of the world had. And so, because of that impact that it had overseas, a lot of people started thinking about whether or not capitalism was the right business model. And capitalism in its context of companies being run for boards and management. Actually sounds a little bit like mutuals too, but that's the sort of thinking that people were saying caused the GFC. When a business is run for 2 stakeholder groups at the expense of all other stakeholder groups, customers, suppliers, staff, partners, etc., then things get out of whack and something goes wrong. And in this case, it was the GFC. And Michael Porter, who is an absolute legend in terms of business, works at the Harvard Business School. He's got endless amounts of books out about how to do business. Teamed up with a guy called Mark Kramer, who was a very, very successful money manager over a long period of time, and started to look at where business has gone wrong and what it needs to do. And they decided that really the issue was that businesses had lost their connection between company success and social progress. They say shared value isn't a social responsibility, philanthropy, or even sustainability, but a new way to achieve economic success. It's not on the margin of what companies do, but at the centre. And that's how we think about our business. That shared success for all our stakeholders sits at the centre of what we do. And actually, Mark Kramer came out to Australia. He was brought out by the Shared Value Project, which is doing some really good work. And he sat down and he went through our model, and we had him talk to our people, and he said at the end, look, Bendigo Bank is one of those troublesome companies that's been doing shared value long before Michael Porter started talking about it. So maybe we're more shared value. Or maybe we fit more into David Cameron's big society, where he's been saying a lot more decision making needed to be devolved back into communities and taken away from the bureaucracy at the centre, because the communities actually knew what it was they needed, and they were going to best be able to direct capital to those things that help most. He's in fact established a big society bank funded by the government and other banks to lend into social trading enterprises. That's been going since 2012. I'm not really sure how much they've lent or how successful that's been. Those nuances around the nomenclature, you know, is it shared value? Is it social trading? Is it part of the new economy? You know, is it big society? What is it? I think don't matter too much. You know, to me it comes back to what it is that we're trying to achieve. And, you know, the chief imaginer, I'm using the new fintech terms, I'll try and get pivot in somewhere along the line. The you know, chief imaginer of Community Bank, Rob Hunt, he always used to say, this is a commercially minded, cooperatively spirited business. And goes back to that saying of successful customers, successful bank, successful community, but only in that order. I've talked today about Community Bank. I could easily have come here and talked about some of our other businesses, Community Sector Bank, which is about working with the community sector to try and optimise the use of capital and cash flow that goes through that sector for the benefit of that sector to be able to do more with the funds that flow through. I could have talked about HomeSafe, which is a equity release product that we put together because we saw a social problem where there's lots of people sitting in big houses worth $2 and $3 million on a pension who can't afford to put the heating on during winter. You know, there's a number of different parts of our business that I could have talked about today, but they all come back to that core purpose of feeding into prosperity and not feeding off it. So, after hearing all of that, I think I'd like to see whether or not you guys think this is a social enterprise, and you guys can't vote. What do you think? Is it a social enterprise? For yes, put your hands up. Okay, well, I'm in the right place then. All right, that's it for me. I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we do that, please thank Mike Hurst. We've got a little bit of time for questions. Don't leave it till too late, sir. Oh, good to see you again.
Thanks, Rob. I'm Freddie Brincat, founder of CBS Inc. in Adelaide, South Australia. I think Rob Hunt was a South Australian too, wasn't he?
It's news to him, but...
Look, I just wanted to make a quick comment and then ask you a question. Very few boards of public companies have a representative on their board that's a social capital people or consumer nominee. We do. And I think when I start to read public companies' annual reports and I see that there are consumer nominees or people who are experts in social capital, I'll start to be more of a believer of the impact and the control and the power that the people can have in such situations. So I think it would be a very good move. Mike, I just wanted to focus on another level of the bank's economic, community and social impact around your staff diversity, including employees from multicultural backgrounds, Indigenous backgrounds and people with a disability. And I think looking at Bendigo Bank, you do have a staff diversity policy, I would think. Yep. Do you measure the number of people from multicultural backgrounds and, say, particularly my area of expertise, people with a disability, and do you set or consider setting targets around employing those people? Because I'm a shareholder of a community bank in Bendigo, and I'm just wondering if the staff you employ, how many have a disability or how many come from multicultural backgrounds, because that's walking the walk for me, and jobs change lives.
Sure. So a couple of things there. One is just in terms of who's on the board. We actually have a community bank director who sits on our company board, David Matthews, who is from Rapanyup, so he was one of those leaders that established the first community bank. He's there in his own right as a businessman. He's a very successful farmer, but he's also there with a great understanding of how community bank works and what it's trying to achieve. So, it may not meet the definition you put up, but it certainly is a different mindset and approach that he brings to the board. Yes, we do have targets around diversity. We do measure that. We have a survey that we do every year to understand the backgrounds of our people and whether or not they identify as able or disabled, as what languages are spoken at home, etc., etc. Diversity is something that we are very keen to encourage, because we understand that if we're going to bank the whole of the Australian population, which is what we want to do, then we need to have the empathy and understanding in our organisation of where those people come from if we're going to do it successfully. So it is a key objective for us. I think we are a little hamstrung though in that we've got two head offices in Adelaide and Bendigo, where we employ, across those two sites about 2,500 people. So Bendigo is certainly not as diverse a population as, say, Sydney is, or even a Melbourne, and Adelaide more diverse, but we can only reflect the community that we live in terms of that diversity. So, Bendigo does struggle a little bit in terms of that diversity.
Mike, you must have an ongoing frustration with organisations and people you meet saying, great model, wonderful, one day I'll move my banking to you. That's a frustration. But on the other hand, of your existing customers, to what degree do you think your social enterprise status is actually a draw card to them, or are they just banking with you because you happen to have the right branch in the right location, or their employer sort of encouraged it? Does it actually give you an edge?
Yeah, look, I think it does. And it does in different ways. I read all the customer complaints that come into my office to understand where we need to improve and how we need to get better. And there's plenty of them, believe me. And then I look at the advocacy surveys for banking and we're way ahead of everybody else. We always win the most trusted award. Last year we won the Foresters Award for customer experience across all industries, and I weigh that up against the customer complaints and I go, well, something else is at play here. And I think the piece that is play is exactly what you talk about, that people cut us a lot more slack, support us a lot more because of the good that they see us doing.
And by the way, tell us who you are and where you're from, just to give us a sense of you.
Sure. Hi, my name's Jackie Story. I work for the City of Burundara, but I also am a budding entrepreneur on the side. Thank you for your talk. I was just wondering about how you said the volunteers in the country towns or wherever they are often kind of the champions of the bank and kind of lead a lot of the work there, I guess, and that you rely on them in some ways to kind of spread the word, I guess, around the town or whatnot and get people on board. I'm just wondering how, I guess, my entrepreneurial pursuits kind of rely on activating the community and finding leaders to really be on board to champion the cause or issue or whatever. How do you activate the community? Does it start with them or does it start with the bank?
Yeah, it's a reverse inquiry model, so it actually starts with the community wanting to do something, and as I said, in the initial stage it was around withdrawal of banking services. Today it's more about being able to develop a revenue stream for that community. So, I mean, there's a couple of community bank directors. Nan, I don't know if you want to add anything, or Lynn, to that comment.
Oh, bear with me, I'll get the microphone to you so we can all hear you.
Nan Capel, and I'm on the East Ivanhoe and Heidelberg Community Bank branch of Bendigo Bank's board. It was very much around a community gathering together and saying we want our bank back, and the movers and shakers, it was often the traders because they'd lost the bank and they had to, banks only opened from 9 till 3 back then. You had to leave your community to go to bank somewhere else. So yeah, it was the key people who wanted the same outcome. Lynn?
Yes, good morning everyone. I'm here from northern Tasmania and a small country town there. For us, we had 3 banking systems existing in the town, but it was a compelling argument to me back in the early 2000s when we started the project that Bendigo was prepared, and the only bank that I could find in Australia and the world, that was prepared to share revenue with the community. And so, despite having a town that would have been regarded as being fully banked, the argument was compelling that we had an opportunity to trial a different model. All we had to do was convince the community that it was worth it. And we have, and a number of other community banks in inner cities, but also in small country towns have been able to do the same thing subsequently. And you do have to work very hard at convincing the community, but that's not a bad thing because it's an energising factor. It's a rally, it's a call to arms, it's a call to action to do something different with the revenue that leaves your community and never comes back. But if you can trap it in your community, you can do stuff with it.
I'm afraid I only have time for one more question for you, Mike, and I'll take it in the order that I received the raised hand. If you could pass it on. Thank you. Final question, folks. Sorry if you didn't get your question.
Thanks very much. I'm Jeanette Large, the CEO of Women's Property Initiatives, and our organisation develops and provides affordable rental housing for disadvantaged women-headed households. We established a social enterprise real estate agency, being a completely for-profit real estate agency to create a revenue stream that comes back into the not-for-profit side of the business. I just felt like I heard through your presentation some of the challenges that we face with our social enterprise real estate agency, which is operating out there in that commercial real estate agency market where the importance of us providing the service that any other real estate agency provides has to be top quality, has to be up there, absolutely no questions asked. However, also communicating the benefit that our social enterprise is doing, because the business profits are being channeled back into the not-for-profit side of the business. So, and look, it's been confirmed. As the CEO, I have actually rung around our landlords from our real estate agency, getting feedback from them, and it's confirmed that the service we provide is absolutely top quality. But I suppose I'm wondering, my question is, it seems you struggle a little bit with getting those messages across. Do you have any marketing tips for us? It's always been a really big, how do we do it? And people, some people, all they want is the good service. Some people, it's so important that what we're providing has that added value. So I suppose I'm just saying, any marketing tips for us in how we can convey that side of it? Thanks.
Well, first, congratulations on a great initiative. That's fantastic. Really well done. look, I wish I could give you a panacea to solve that problem, but it really is about going around and talking to people and repeating the story and getting others to talk about it so that the advocacy is there in the community. Do you only have the one site, or have you got a number of different sites? Just the one. So, one of the things that I personally sort of always wrestle with, running a nationally based organisation that really is very well connected locally, is where is the best spend of our advertising dollar. And we spend about $20 million a year in advertising and marketing promotion. About 15 million of that is spent through the community banks at the local level. And I think we have pretty good cut through at the local level, and that local advertising and sponsorship and grants does a really strong job. But at the national level, we don't get that cut through, and that's the challenge that we face, which is slightly different to the challenge that you face. So, I think it really is just about getting out there, telling your story, be really overt about what it is that you're trying to achieve. Go to the schools, go to the the places where all the people are who have got the homes and are looking to sell or rent or whatever, and just tell that story, because it is an engaging story. It's going to drive some fantastic outcomes, and I'm sure the community will get behind it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Mike Hurst.
Thank you.
Mike, thank you so much. Terrific. An overwhelmingly jargon-free presentation from a leading Australian banker. Unprecedented. Also, I just want to point out that I've been involved in launching the Connected Communities Melbourne Foundation, or Fund, which Bendigo Bank was absolutely essential to getting off the ground. It's a foundation that you might use to access some capital. Like much of Bendigo Bank's activities, it's not quite business as usual. There are no standardised funding rounds. They do not take 12 months to get back to you saying you've been unsuccessful. And there is no specific brief about what they will or will not fund. So, well worth your while to investigate that. Now, folks, we're treating you pretty mean and keen this morning. Morning tea is about to be served, so you'll be caffeinating in the atrium area, which is called, fancy enough, the Sky Lounge. Dig that, the Sky Lounge. But only for 15 minutes, and we'll regather here at past for Tong Yi. Fantastic keynote presentation. Then, lots more to happen. Oh, also, we're going to be announcing the happy recipients of a bursary that will send people to Christchurch, will we not, for the Social Enterprise World Forum. And a bunch of, perhaps even you, will be heading there, thanks to the generosity of Belinda Morrissey and the English Family Foundation. So that will be worth paying attention to. Folks, the Sky Lounge awaits. Reconvene here at past. That's not very long. Happy caffeination.
That was really great. I thought that was fantastic. So good job. With the bursary fund,
yes.
Belinda's still not here from Sydney.
Oh, bugger.
Yeah,
okay.
So that means we might have to delay that until lunch. The only other thing is, she's from the English Family Foundation, but there's lots of other donors as well. Some of the donors are in the crowd today.
Gotcha.
So
anyone you want me to know?
There's a whole list of them, but the big ones are the Ian Potter Foundation,
oh, yes, sure.
Equity Trustees, the government, which Minister Moonen obviously mentioned. It was Belinda's idea. I ran the whole project, and then there was multiple donors, if that makes sense. But they're the big ones, yeah.
Gotcha. I'll just open the second.
And Mark told you, so the Sue bursary announcement has moved to
Yes.
lunch. Yep.
So I believe.
But at the end of morning tea, I will come and hand you a handheld mic for the PA system out there to do the let's move back in for. So I think I've got the rest of the master presentation here, so I might try and add my slides into yours.
Talks like an old drinking.
Oh, have you?
It's fantastic. It's how I'm I think it's
You don't have videos and things?
I do have videos, done very well.
PowerPoint sort of representation. Yeah. Okay. Hi, how you going, Matt? Yeah, Lucy, the one girl with the red hair out by the banner, she is grabbing David and Mike Hurst, the banker. So go find her, and hopefully she's got something to go for you.
Trying to, because we had at our state conference, we had that was the focus was on social media.
Yep.
And that's a little bit.
I think it goes.
Explore whether we get certifications as a social media.
Right.
Yourselves.
Yeah.
Certified.
Well, the community banks. Not the bank itself.
Is there any merit in B Corporation?
Yeah, we've had that exploration. So our Alliance Bank is B Corp, right, which is we own. It's a little bit more onerous, and and the question
is there a benefit? What's the
6 of 1?
Yep, got it.
Really matter. I mean, to be honest, whether if we. It's really around people associated with
Final, yeah. This one?
Yeah. It's going to make
Yes.
It really depends on who's more familiar with
That's exactly right, isn't it? Social enterprise might make more sense with B Corporation. That might be more insider baseball. There's a lot of insider baseball in this room.
Yes.
You know.
That is all correct. All right. So.
And I saw there was some criticism of it.
I'll do it after we've copied them across, just because there was a bit of an issue with them.
It's reasonable. Well, that's one of the.
Not unreasonable.
That's one of the things.
All right. Does that look correct?
We come in and
I see.
because we basically give out money to sponsorships and grants, right? So why wouldn't we invest in a company that's going to actually...
The background on this one should be black.
So it still completes the social mission first.
That's fine.
Second one is the diversification.
All right, so now we'll do the video. Is there only one video?
Or you may choose
Or you may choose to actually...
One is this? Okay.
It's still going out in the community, but it's just a little bit of reducing the
loud.
one core product.
Yes.
Yep, so that works.
Endless opportunities. If you'll excuse me, I better get ready for our next one. Nice to see you again, Barbara.
Yeah, there was.
Does it automatically play?
Let's have a look. So, start when clicked automatically, and we want to do that with the other one too.
Oh no, wait. No, start and click.
Stop. Oh, you want it to be clicked? Okay, when clicked. Same with the other one. Do you want it to play full screen? Okay. Start when clicked. Yep, so it's both start when clicked. Okay, we ready to rock and roll?
Yes, yes.
Well
Thank
done.
you so much.
No, thank you. You were the one that persevered with it. All right, I will eject that for you.
Is there a wireless mic for myself here?
I will ask the right person.
You know what, just as a backup, I'm also just going to copy it to the desktop, just in case anything goes wrong, we can run up and just open this version.
Yeah. Can delete the other one.
Okay.
No problem.
Looking forward to it. All right, so this one can be deleted.
Cool.
Well done. All right. Ready to roll. So there's a clicker. Everything's set up. Perfect. Yep.
What is it?
Yeah.
It's just I'll say. Okay. It's not there's the subject. I believe so. It can be a wireless handheld. It doesn't really matter.
Oh, well, there is that, that handheld one.
You're
Are you
welcome to use that.
That's fine. That's fine.
Otherwise, there's also the lapel, but it's a little bit. You've got it. You can. So up to you.
I think I'll just
Use that.
and the clicker for the
Yep, that's that one.
Can I just test it?
Yeah, go right ahead. Oh, I might not plug the USB back in. Lucky you tested, Tom, because that would have been embarrassing, wouldn't it?
Holiday slides popped up or something?
There we go. I just hadn't plugged the USB. I'll be back in about 5 minutes.
Sure, no
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that would be great. Thank you. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
Grab your seats, folks, and you might have to return your phone to silent or to stun. Tong Yi's about to take the stage.
But the catering from at St. Collins
is yes. Future Coffee is just I just want to say
No worries.
And thanks very much for doing
The
this.
green.
Sort of had them all there, ready to go with names on them. So I really appreciate you doing all those little extra bits and pieces.
Just
I think
let
it's
me know what I need.
cleaner than having people coming up.
It can be made a fuss off, it can be just done very discreetly and quickly.
I'm just sitting there, so if you need me.
Exactly.
The only thing is I know.
Yeah, if you want to. Yeah. No, Tom will go through a lot of slides.
And also, I discussed with him yesterday. He's going to be a table host. So just invite. He's going to be here all day. People can ask questions.
Grab your seats, folks. Our second keynote of the day is hot to trot, good to go, ready to roll. Did you enjoy morning tea, folks?
Yep.
Couldn't help but notice the pastries were gone, but there was plenty of fruit remaining. I know some of you had to queue for coffee, but one of you has clearly thought ahead and brought a bodum. How very generous. A true conference-going professional. And we'll be making those bursary announcements a little later today. We just thought you wanted to talk, you wanted to caffeinate, you wanted to refresh, so we'll slip that into the program a little bit later. Some of you may be off to Christchurch, courtesy of people like the Ian Potter Foundation, Victorian Government, English Family Foundation. And by the way, that catering was provided by a social enterprise, The Green at St. Columbus, based right here in Hawthorn, one of the hotbeds of social disadvantage in Melbourne for interstate visitors. Some of them haven't even renovated their investment properties very much recently, to the degree that they would like. Now, all right, folks, your full and undivided attention, not to me, folks, I don't crave it, I crave it on behalf of our next keynote presenter, Tong Yi. I don't know what you think of when you think of Singapore. I think of gleaming towers, luxury shopping malls, banking and finance, and a hugely successful country. That might be enough for some Singaporeans, but some want to make it even better and perhaps bring even more heart and soul into the city-state. Tong Yi and his colleagues desire to do nothing less than that. You are quietly a bunch of revolutionaries, I think, which generally hasn't gone down so well in Singapore from my knowledge of history. He's a director of the Thought Collective, which is a curious amalgam of enterprises. Everything from a publishing house to a school providing education for grown-ups, to cafes, restaurants, business incubators where organisations can come and meet and merge and barter and support each other, all with this grand social mission. Ladies and gentlemen, direct from Singapore, please make him very welcome, Director of the Thought Collective, Tong Yi.
Good morning. Do you guys mind if I come out here instead of behind the rostrum? Okay, I guess. There's a part about basically my, it's a habit in presentation, that if I don't speak authentically or I don't speak relevantly, it just irks the hell out of me. So there will be times over here where I'm not going to self-censor. Throughout the talk, I could use inappropriate words here and there, but please be forgiving about this over there. So, yes. So, yeah, sometimes the Singapore government will, I mean, quite often the Singapore government will invite me to go in and do keynotes, and they're always like sitting in the audience like, please don't say it, please don't say it. And they're hoping that I don't say what I need to say. But yes, I do need to speak authentically as one. And the second thing that's been happening is that this presentation really is not from an old slide deck. Relevancy is key for me. So if I do begin to present, a lot of actually what I'm talking about today has been a result of actually what Social Traders has done for me in the past 2 days to get to know you guys and get to know the social enterprises and get to know basically the Australian context. I've been here over the past maybe 3 or 4 years. I think Bessie is somewhere. Hello, Bessie. Yeah. And old friends are here. I'm going to just start by that particular context, right? Authenticity and relevancy. If I'm at all not relevant, please let me know and I'll make a quick shift. Okay. So, first thing, this title was written 3 months ago when, you know, sometimes they insist on titles and you don't know what you want to talk about. So I thought I just gave the title whatever. Okay. If at the end this doesn't make sense, let it go. Okay. So, let's start. I'm going to give a quick background as to what the Thought Collective is. I know some of you have already got some understanding of it. But this is a group of actually 5 social enterprises in Singapore. We started in 2002, at a time before social enterprise was even known as a phrase or a term. It was interesting because it was in 2006 that, because of the work, the ministry had come over to us and told us that you're a social enterprise. And we go, is that right? I didn't even know that. And they sort of named it for us, and then after that, it sort of stuck. The 5 social enterprises right now have a collective team of about 110 to 120 staff or so. It's considered to be pretty large for a social enterprise in Singapore. Most Singaporean social enterprises are between 3 to 5 members or so. The annual revenue is between 11 million to 14 million. Not annual profit, unfortunately. Annual revenue itself is between 11 to 14 million, and it does give a good sense of actually the impact of the work in Singapore. So in time, I'm going to give a sense of actually what these particular groups do and how do they integrate. But School of Thought essentially is a pre-university school. This is for 17 and 18-year-olds, about 1,000 students a year, right, go through this space. Think Tank Publishing is content curation. We do everything from publications to exhibitions to anything itself, right, that people need editorial for. Right? Food for Thought is a series of restaurants which only open up in institutional spaces. We don't do it in shopping centers and places. We only go to public parks or places itself with community value. Right there. Thingscape is experience design. Largely what we're doing over here is that we look at anything from events, classroom experiences, how do we make them better? How do we make them more emotional? How do we come to a place where people can resonate? And this is actually for the millennial generation a really good and thriving business. Right. And lastly, Common Ground, that's a consultancy, primarily to impact other social enterprises. Okay. So I'm going to give a sense, right, of what we do, but before we start, I would like to just say this. There is no way in what I'm about to share that I'm communicating the idea that I think that this is a way to do things. Although in Singapore we're seen as largely highly successful, we always understand over here that the complexity of social problems are just so messy that I don't think anybody can claim to have the model or the solution. And I think it's bullshit if I come to a place over here where I claim the same. And I think the only way to really tackle social problems is really through a place of humility first. We don't know the answer, but we're willing to listen and figure this out. Right? So I'm going to start with a story, one that I think perhaps is testament to the influence that this body of work did somehow begin to garner. In 2014, Singapore was going through, I would say, what we would term a political crisis. We've been a one-party system for, well, 50 years, right? And in doing so over here, it's not an authoritarian state or things like that. It's just that Singaporeans generally believe that having a one-party system is a far more efficient way to do it, as opposed to you guys. So having one party, no real vote, as long as basically the authority knows exactly what is it doing, then the power given to them is given with privilege, and they take this privilege well, right? So what's been happening over here is that 2011, that notion began to be challenged, and Singapore's political system began to change vastly. So as a country with no natural resources, reputation is everything for us. This whole story of the gleaming skyscrapers and all that story, that's the only thing actually we fundamentally sell. Beyond that, we have nothing in the ground. We have no land, we have very few people, and without the impression that we're somehow doing well for ourselves or successful for ourselves, right, we're more or less screwed, right, as a country. So any damage to that reputation is it's a pretty scary thing for us, right? And if you ever see Singaporeans react, right, to any form of negative comment, it's not because we want to close down the comment, but rather because of fear of damaging that reputation, right? So in 2011, social media began to be really big, right? And as it was big over here, what happened was that there was no way to control the media anymore, right? There's no way to control narrative, there's no way to control divergent views. And when this happened over here, it really began to damage the overall narrative that Singapore was a successful society, because social issues began to come to the surface, right? Complaints were a lot louder, there were a lot more stronger language, and they were a lot more emotional. And people then began to swing, right? And in doing so, what happened over here was that Thought Collective, initially up to 2010, was an interesting organization of people who were doing good, but there was never a time where suddenly in 2011, the basis of the work, which is essentially through narrative, right? Healing a nation through narrative, it suddenly gained relevance, right? And what happened over here was that there was one particular big protest that was happening in Singapore. And this was around people who were disgruntled, all coming together and really wanting to, I guess, express their anger. And we felt that that was a good thing to do. But we felt that there must be a balance with people who are also showing gratitude at the same time, right? So at that point in time, the alumni to School of Thought was already roughly, I think, almost 12,000 students or so, right? And among those students, many of them believed that Singapore needs to be preserved with that particular, I guess, idea in mind, right? That we are an abundant society, we don't have to go down the scarcity route. And they wanted to do, so we knew that the protest would be at 2 p.m., right, in this gigantic park, and thousands would gather. And they wanted to make sure that in the morning, there would be another show of gratitude in the morning just before the angry protest. So they wanted to balance the anger together with the gratitude. So they got together candy floss machines and bouncing castles and things like that at a time just before the protesters were about to come out, right? And what's interesting over here is that in the whole planning of that, we couldn't find the money. Right. The entire operation would have cost roughly about, I think, 26,000, and youth, being youth, wouldn't know how to raise that money. So what happened was that we were sort of talking about it. Some of the youth put it out on Facebook. They talked about it. It says, how do we raise 26,000 within 2 weeks? Because this is really very quick, right? And what happened over here was that we just sort of almost gave up on the idea. So it's 10 days in, so I gave up on the idea. And I was walking from my office, right, back to the auditorium which I teach at. And I was just walking along the street, and suddenly a car pulled out from the side of the street, right? And sort of drove past me, right? Sort of like walking next to me as I was walking. So what's going on here, right? And the car stopped, and he winded down. Just don't wind down the window. No one winds the window. The window came down. The window came down, and this man in the car leaned out the car and says, "Are you Tong Yi?" I was going, oh, I'm in deep shit right now. Right? And I go, yes. And it says, are you the one that's organizing that event, right, just before the protest? And I go, yes. Right? And he says, okay, so this is for you. And he gave an envelope to me, right, this brown envelope, and then he drove off. I was like, whoa. So I took the envelope and I opened it up. And I'm not joking, there were 12 $1,000 bills inside. And it was $12,000, and there was a small note that says, because we believe in your work. Yeah. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you. Come to Singapore. So, yeah. And he gave us this money, and it was interesting over there. I was going, oh, holy crap. And the 12,000 was actually all we really needed to just start off the entire thing. And once we went out, we put it on Facebook. It said someone just gave us $12,000. Till now, I still have no idea who gave that money. But once in a while, we would get that kind of favor. At a critical point in time where we need to actually have this turn, people will step in, right? And I don't know whether that speaks to basically the value of the work, but as far as Singapore is concerned, people see it as something which is absolutely necessary, right? So, Blackout Nights is I think an element itself that will start defining for us why is it that we do what we do, all right? And I know I've yet to be very, very clear, but just give me a while and I'll explain. A government agency had come to us and they had said that social capital in Singapore was very quickly on the decline. Right? Trust was dropping, and the very diverse communities were not talking to one another anymore. Okay? And we had a small meeting with the minister, and he came to me and he shared with me about what happened for him when he was growing up. And he said that as he was growing up, there were always these times over here where he would really appreciate blackouts in Singapore. This was during the 60s over here, where electrical systems were not really very strong. And during the blackout, what happened is everybody on the entire street would come out on the street and bring out the candles, and the fathers would tell stories to the children, right? They call them blackout nights. They would happen basically every 2 to 3 weeks or so. Blackouts would happen, right, and children would cheer, right? Yay, blackout night! No electricity, all running down, all sat down, they talked. And they remembered, right, that during that time, different races would come together and they would hear these stories, right? And they really believed that that was something which was built by social capital, right? And he said, these days, you just don't get this anymore, right? And he asked, what would it take to recreate this, right? And so what we did itself, I had to go back and put together some stupid proposal for him, right? Where we had to count every single thing that would be involved in putting together a blackout night, right? And the dollar amount, right, came out to be this one for every blackout night, right? So he said, okay, and he commissioned 5 of them, right? And I remember doing that, and I was just thinking back, wow, blackout nights used to be free. And many of these wonderful things that used to happen, people did it because they were coming from a space of identity, because it was important to them. But right now, many of these social things, they're somehow, I don't know, they've moved to the state, or they've moved to the government, or they've moved to some other vendor that needs to somehow provide, right? And in doing so, it became a point of alarm for me, and a big wake-up call almost about 6 years ago when this happened. And I thought, I don't think state can keep paying for these things, right? That even though, I get the intention of the blackout night, but it's not natural and it's fake. And it's not going to scale. It's not going to move like culture does, right? In doing so itself, I was starkly itself caught by this particular situation, that within the same year, we had problems across our hospitals. Now, Singapore is the second best healthcare system in the world, right? Highly affordable, very accessible, still highly efficient, right? And it works. But if you take a look yourself at the idea of a mother who is frustrated and a state caregiver who is frustrated, right? And a mother giving the level of care that she gives, right, is essentially giving it for free. I mean, the family is the most financially unsustainable thing in the world, right? It's just stupid, right? Love is extremely expensive, but we give it anyway, I mean, do so. And if you want to commodify these things, they just don't translate. And if you try to commodify love and you bring it yourself into a state function that says, how do you create a more loving society? You're going to pay through the skin of your teeth, right, to get people to love. And in doing so over here, we saw that. We saw many state functions that essentially were fulfilling the function of what a family should be doing, right? And we tend to actually make this into a public good, but it just doesn't work that way. And Singapore began to see this. And we began to think about this idea. That if there's going to be a social intervention, right, and in School of Thought we always teach this principle, enforcement is inversely proportional to responsibility. If responsibility is high, there's no need to enforce nothing, right? You don't have to build anything. But when responsibility is low, enforcement goes through the roof, right? And what we're seeing over here in terms of the Trump era or terrorism or anything else that you're seeing, right? Once we lose social capital, once individuals' responsibilities around citizenship begins to drop, or responsibility to families begin to drop, or my responsibility as a father or a son begin to drop, right? All of them scale into social costs, right? So Singapore comes to a place over here where we are deeply concerned about this because there are many social frameworks that are fundamentally working, but because of an invisible part, essentially about responsibility and trust, right? But we're seeing them starting to deteriorate, right? And in doing so over here, we believe that there needs to be a body of work that comes in to intervene upon that. Not to intervene when the person with disability can't get a job. Not to intervene when somebody with HIV can't necessarily get opportunity in life, right? That is way downstream. But before this even happens, the question is, why do we even need a social enterprise in the first place to handle that? Why can't society handle that? Or why can't community handle that? And why do you need, right, a group of crazy people to come out and set up this kind of stuff? Because if a society is healthy, a society doesn't need essentially the social enterprise. I don't know whether this makes sense. It doesn't need it. The fact that this entity exists is because society is broken, right? And what we began to look at over here is whether or not our social enterprise or the body of work we did could actually move more upstream, right? Narrative levels, cultural levels, right? Where we start to look at the identity of the person. It says, what is it you as a citizen are not doing such that social enterprises are under so much strain, right? So this work happened, right, and up to about 2011 or so, we were very happy with the work that we were doing, right? Very self-congratulatory, going, oh, you clever people. And we began to actually build this particular work. And what happened was the big wake-up call came when we actually started to go into poverty issues. So 2002 we started, 2011, 2012 we started to go into actual impact work, right, into the social issues. We were doing a lot of culture building work, but 2012 we began to go in. And one of the very, very first cases of the ladies I met was a lady who, she wasn't a single mother. Her husband had actually recently got cancer, very late stage, lost his job, could not work, and she had 4 children, right? So she was from a low-income family, right, and had no capacity to get a job and never really worked before. So social enterprise, or these SSOs, these are social service officers, came to us and says, could you help job placement with us? And could you help her find a job, right, on all the social enterprises that you had? And because of the work we did, we couldn't find a space for her, but we had so many other friends that we could, right? And we learned over here that actually her main skill was really that of a seamstress, right? So as a seamstress over here, what happened was that she could sew beautifully. And we finally found a placement for her that would pay her $1,800. Okay, and for Singapore, that's pretty decent for a low-income group, right? And you pay $1,800 a month, right? Brokered everything, arranged the support, the mentoring, and we were very excited because on Monday she was supposed to show up and start at work, right? And on Monday she didn't show up. And she didn't show up. We walked around, right, looking for her, and we called her on the phone and she just wasn't available. Right? 2 days later, we realized that she was in hospital, right? And we were going, what are you doing in hospital? So we went over, and her sewing hand had been cut in every section over here, right? And she couldn't use her hand anymore. And what we learned over here was her husband had taken a beer bottle and had cut open her hand, right there. And in doing so over here, we were like furious. We were going, is this a domestic violence case? And she says, no, nothing's wrong. I'm very grateful for my husband. And I said, what? Right. And she said, when we got married, I promised my husband that I would take care of the children and I would never ever work. And my husband needs to protect my integrity and protect my promise, which is why he cut my hand in order to do this, right? And when I was listening to her, you could hear, it was honestly, I wish you were there to see it, but her voice, she absolutely was grateful to her husband. She was grateful, right? And she said, you know, I was very torn, I was very anxious, I couldn't go out, but now I've learned how to trust, right? And because I can't sew, he's taken away that temptation, right? And I don't really need to go out to work anymore, right? And in doing so over here, when this happened, right, her operation cost about $60,000. State managed to pay for it. But in seeing the whole situation, I remember we stepped back and we went, you know, if you really want to look at this, the nature of our problems today can't be solved with technical solutions. They're not about, you know, jobless, let's get you a job. You know, no opportunity, let's get you an opportunity, right? If we talk about the complexity of it, there really is deep story that's involved in these particular things, right? And the story is not something you can even deny it from them, right? This is something itself of culture, right? Something itself of identity. It's part of actually who she was. She didn't want to press charges. She didn't think it was criminal, right? And we realized again, and we became more and more convinced by this, that if there's going to be any form of sustainable intervention into social work, right, we cannot neglect the narrative level of work. If it's really just about technical work over here, giving skills, giving opportunity and things like that, we might really miss, right, the whole idea of the narrative. What's driving this? What's the story behind what you do, why you do it, right? And in doing so over here, we realized that the work was something very different from what most social enterprises were doing, right? Because very, very few were thinking about this on a narrative level. In the short privilege of a few days itself, I had to actually go out and attend some of the more successful social enterprises in Melbourne. I saw exactly the same trait. People were intervening on a narrative level. They may not have named it that or called it that, right? But they were intervening on an identity level. The reason why the young youth at risk was coming back again and again was not because you gave him skills, but because you changed his identity. You renamed him. You gave him himself, right, a new person. Right? And because of that, that's why he's committed to your work, and that's why he's coming back, right? But until we build, right, the skill sets in social enterprises to know how to do that, right, then it's a sort of a fuzzy thing, you know, you're sort of like floundering around and hoping it will happen, but it doesn't happen that way. There really are technical skills behind it. Right? So in seeing this over here, we felt that many social challenges, they're not technical problems. Right? I don't think you can solve it. I don't think poverty can be solved. It will be there. But what we can do is we can change things on a narrative level. Yeah, and at least for our body of work over here, because of the nice ecosystem and the synergy between how downstream social enterprises work together with upstream social enterprises, where we do the narrative work and they basically do the social intervention technical work, there's a very nice ecosystem going, right? And I think that's what's essentially causing the sustainable impact, right, that we're starting to see in Singapore, right? Okay. So that was a very brief introduction of roughly what we do. I'm now going to show you a video. It will give you a sense of this in picture form. All right. Okay. Oops.
When I look at Singapore, I see this incredibly blessed city. There's so much going for us. We've got wealth, we've got education, we've got security. Can you imagine what Singapore could do for the world if she lived up to her fullest potential? I want to help her get there. I want to see Singapore confident of what she could offer to the world. I really want to see Singapore go from being just a good city to a really great one.
In all the years that I've been teaching, I still find it sometimes shocking and even saddening how many times when to look at our students, we still experience to see that fear. Fear for them to begin to create change, fear for them to even just try and do what they really, really believe in. And I understand that fear. I totally understand it because I too grew up in this political system. I've experienced my fair share of failure, so much to the extent that I would pull back and I would say that, don't dare try. So what I would really want to do is begin to have a Singapore of people who would impact not just our own countries, but really that region.
Singapore is excellent in so many ways. I want more people to see and to realize that already we leverage our hard capital in these bold and amazing and visionary ways, and we do that really well on a consistent basis. But I also want Singapore to produce great art, innovative technologies, and cutting-edge design. I want us to count. Whenever they talk about New York, Norway, and Germany, I want Singapore to count with these creative cities.
So I guess right from the start, what we really wanted to do was create a new way forward, a new way that we could think, live, and serve as a community.
Dot Collective's mission is to build social and emotional capital in Singapore. It's ridiculously important, and we just have to do it.
There are 5 different companies in the Dot Collective. They all share the same mission, but they execute it in 5 different strategies.
So we began with a school of thought because we understand that teachers really are the front line of any form of change in the country. And that really is the principle. If a classroom does not shift, the nation does not shift. School of Thought wanted to create a pedagogy, a way of learning itself that would outlast examinations. That would be something that would be enduring for the hearts of every student.
What School of Thought has done for me is that it's given me the ability to communicate and to bring my point across. I've always been concerned for our society and for the poor and for the needy. And being able to communicate better makes me feel like a greater part of society and gives me the confidence that one day I can make a difference to this world.
So what we really want to do is drive innovation in civic learning because we know that today's youth will be tomorrow's thought leaders.
To aid School of Thought's work, we needed a publishing and media arm to do information design. That's why we started our second company, FinTech. The world is so complex today. There are so many conflicting points of view and voices out there. We have to help youth cut through the clutter and make meaning of all this information out there.
What FinTech does basically is to take a complex issue such as the global economic crisis and make it accessible to the kid who probably knows next to nothing. The editorial team, researchers, writers, editors, we curate content. And then the creative team will help to visualize the data and design how the information is processed. By doing this, we hope to spark off more in-depth conversations about the big issues in the world today.
But we also needed to take this conversation about issues outside of the classroom and into the community. So that's why we went into the restaurant business and began Food for Thought. The mission of Food for Thought is to transform community spaces and to bring people together to eat good food for a good cause.
I've been a long-time customer of Food for Thought. seeing them even now with planning houses. And one of the things that really attracted me was, I think firstly, of course, the food. And since then, I think it has grown to be like my happy place.
You won't see food for thought set up in a shopping mall, but you might find her in a university or a public park or even HDB block. And that's because we deliberately put food for thought restaurants in spaces of great social significance to the community. We theme our restaurants around what is meaningful to that space so that we can encourage conversation and community to grow around that theme.
Ultimately, what we really want to do is just have a city move forward. But you see, our city, like all other cities across the world, have people who live in it that hold these narratives in their head. Stories of the past, stories sometimes they just can't get over. What we really wanted to do was create a wave where they begin to see something different. A new wave on which we view our own city. I think State really is about, it's a company itself that creates learning journeys that can have us begin to see institutions, industries, issues with different eyes.
I was taking a bunch of students out for a trail about environmental literacy. We went to the Dairy Farm Nature Park and we were trekking through the bicycle track. And when we reached the quarry, they were like, wow, this is so worth the trek. What struck me that day was the sort of amazement that they expressed was the same sort of amazement I felt when I was going through the trekking.
The problems facing Singapore in the next 10 years are going to be so complex, there's no way any of us can do this alone. We're going to need all agencies to work together to solve this. We need the government, we need the corporations, we need the NGOs. If we saw more collaboration across society, we're going to see some amazing breakthroughs in how we deal with the city's most pressing problems. So that's why we began our fifth company, Common Ground. We wanted it to be literally that, a common ground for everyone interested in creating the most innovative solutions to our city's social problems to come together and work for the city.
And when I think about all these things that we want to do, is it ambitious? Of course. Is it scary? Sure, right? But it's important and it's exciting.
So why do we want to do this?
At the heart of it, we do this with our youth in mind.
In time, I wish to see youth as the main change makers in Singapore.
Singaporeans can live together with greater acceptance for the differences that we have and also to love each other more.
I hope that Singapore will become a more closely knitted community.
I want to see a Singapore that's more concerned for the poor and uneducated.
I'd like to see Singapore as a place with a lot more compassion and seek a good life rather than seek to attain greater material wealth.
I want people to be less stressful and be more happy. At the heart of it for me, it really is just about making our world just a bit better.
It's about what we want to leave behind for tomorrow's generation.
It's legacy.
I'm going to cut this video because there's actually a lot of newspaper and press and things like that. Okay, but that's the Thought Collective. I'm very respectful of time, and what I'm going to do over here is this one section will show you some of the strategies to, I think for those of you who are building social enterprises, this is some, I think, has been very helpful for us in helping us succeed in the long run. Right? I'm going to move quite fast because there are 3 points at the end I really want to make. Right? Okay, so I'm going to move quite fast with this. We believe that intervention should happen young. When you start working with 30 and 40-year-olds or 50-year-olds, it gets very challenging. Right? Once we become stubborn, it's hard to move. So essentially, I think because of the nature of how we intervene, we are seen as a youth organization even though we're not. Right? But the large bulk of it, of School of Thought and all the other organizations is young people. So when they come in, the first point of contact they'll tend to get is through this magazine called Represent. Represent is published by Think Tank, right? And in doing so over here, it begins with content about identity. Singapore actually has there are no other publications about identity, right? For them to struggle through who is it I am, right? And what is it I stand for, okay? Once they begin to move into the 17 and 18-year-olds, the publication will transform to this magazine called Broader Perspectives, right? The first time itself, right, it was published, we had about 200 subscribers. Right now, we're at 35,000, right? So it's across the country. People all begin to read it and use it. But the idea is that if in 14, 15, 16, you work through your identity and you know what you stand for, then at 17 and 18, you then work into issues and understand what other people stand for and understand why is there this contention you want to go through. Right there. So Think Tank is interesting as a publication because it doesn't subsist through advertising, it only subsists through subscriptions, which means we have tons of advertising space inside, which we only give to social sector organizations. The aim itself is for other social sector organizations which cannot afford to pay for advertising to come and advertise with us for free. Right? And in doing so, over here, we gain a huge network and social capital within that space. Right? So we find over here is that the more complex issues become, we do invest in strong graphic designers that will come in and actually do all the infographics to explain right, what's happening within the region, what's happening in other issues around the world. Right? So once we do this, we realize that media or these publications is only one main way to impact them. They start getting interested, but school of thought is really where the change starts. So if I quickly explain this, I was teaching, my first career itself was a teacher. Right. And I was teaching in the junior college system, and students were graduating with straight A's. And as you know yourself, Singapore ranks extremely high on the PICA, right? So, because we kill our kids, but yeah. So they rank extremely high, but many of them are graduating with largely apathy about society. They effectively didn't give a shit, right? Yeah, and even though you ask them to actually do something in social issues, they wouldn't. So magazines won't change that, because magazines are once in a month, they'll read an article, they might feel inspired after a while, but it disappears within half an hour, right? And in doing so over here, we needed a regular program by which to actually have them do this. So we knew we needed to set up a citizenship or education program, right? But nobody is going to pay for citizenship classes in the private sector. No youth is going to pay you $200 a month to how to become a better citizen, right? But they will pay for English classes, right? And what was happening over here was English was a subject which has skills but no content. And we could plug in any content we wanted to. So what we did over here was we designed the entire citizenship education program, plugged it into an English program, right, and created our Trojan horse there. Right. Yeah. So students came in, paid for English. We got a sustainable model. People were regularly paying, right, attending all these classes. And somewhere in 6 months into the English program, they're going, wow, English is really meaningful, isn't it? And it's like, wow, we feel transformed by this subject. We love it, right? And in doing so over here, and I think this is really where the education of the consumer has to be. When it first started, I think that Trojan horse was necessary. Right now, about 1/3 of our students who join literally join for the citizenship programs. They care less whether or not English does well or not, right? Our oldest student currently is now 35 years old. They also have children themselves, and we're starting a little cult already, right? So, yeah, so it's come full cycle, right? So, primarily within the school of thought experience, what really happens is that there's a lot of emotional wrangling. Teaching is done through stories. Teaching is done through tension, right? Every single class, and I apologize for the language when they leave, if they don't feel fucked up, there's something wrong with the class. You have to leave feeling tension. You have to leave feeling, holy crap. And then they use the week to sort this out, right? Only then does personal voice get clear, right? Where do I stand in these issues, right? Yeah. And doing so over here, they spend anywhere between 6 years to 2 years in this particular program, which is really where the impact is, right? So School of Thought doesn't own IP, or we don't intend to own IP. Everything that we innovate or test within the classes, we then invite public school teachers to come in and learn, right? So public school teachers then come in, they attend these classes, so this is actually a teacher session, not a student session, right? And they would come in to learn these particular things, and then they would take it and go back to their own classrooms and innovate. The idea itself is the public service is too bulky an organization to really begin to pivot well. Sorry, I used that word, right? Yeah. But school teachers could independently innovate. So you don't expect the system to innovate, but you can actually grow it from the ground up, right? And what teachers are doing themselves is they're coming out independently, coming out, attending the classes, recognizing that their students are having a great impact and going back and learning how to do this in their own classrooms there. So the IP for us, I mean, one of the big dreams is that if we can get rid of tuition, if public schools become so strong there's no need for this work anymore, then I think that's our KPI. Right there, yeah. It's a stupid KPI though, because it means you don't have a job. Yeah. But we realized that the conversation that we were having couldn't just retain within the school systems because we were only impacting young people, we weren't impacting older people. And what was going on over here was that many of our students were saying that although I'm in your class and I learn these particular things, once I go out, my parents say I'm an idiot. Right? Why should I be caring for larger issues other than myself? All right? And we realized over here that if we didn't impact larger communities, right, there wouldn't be weight behind what we were saying, which is why actually we entered into the restaurant business. Right? Till today, I still think it was a bad move. Right? It was driven by ideals, not by the practicality of seeing that F&B is shit. Yeah, it's a horrible business to run, right? Truly, truly horrible business to run. You know, in Singapore, rental alone, we pay $250,000 a month in rental. That's $250,000 a month. Do you know how much stress that is? Right? There was once, we opened up a restaurant in the Botanic Gardens. We thought, what a beautiful institutional space, right? Until there was one little lizard that crawled into our aircon compressor, right? Because, you know, gardens have lizards and mice. That you wouldn't think about it when you're entering in. Walked in, zzz, shots of the horns. We paid $65,000 to fix that. Okay, I hate the gardens. So, driven by ideals, not practicality. But in doing so, it's interesting because the restaurant really did throw us into the public awareness. Food reviews came in. People themselves were interested in what these restaurants were doing. This really started because of the Melbourne cafe culture. Right, thanks. Right. So we started it, and because we were one of the first movers in starting up these cafes and things like that, it really did begin to scale. So the restaurants allowed us actually to have public spaces where people would be a lot more porous. Classrooms are not very porous. Adults wouldn't walk in, right? But cafes were very porous. And we could bring basically conversations right into the cafes that we were having already in the classrooms themselves. So in doing so over here, in those conversations, we tapped upon the culture of cafes, right? Running a whole calendar of events there. We also basically did a lot more messaging and branding within the cafe itself, right? So I can't show you all of them, but we did it on the placemats, we did everything else. And it really brought, I think, a new conversation into Singapore, right, as a result of that. So these restaurants over here also were a space in which, just like the magazines, we subsisted primarily through the sales, right, of F&B, but we didn't really rent it out for event space. And what we did is we gave the event space to social sectors. Right, and we said that if you're a charity or NGO and you want basically an event space and you don't want to pay for it, then come in and run your event here. And that's how we filled the calendar very, very quickly. Right, so Food for Thought was known as a main space by which people would then gather and begin to speak. Right, but it's an important move over here to say that if you want to build an ecosystem fast, you need to have a strong offer for other organizations. Right, otherwise your network is going to be weak. Right there. So this was actually an important part, right? That in the organization itself, because there are 5 companies, we could also begin to transition and move out of business threats. Okay, so what you're seeing over here is actually it's a national level exhibition that we were doing, right? And what was going on over here was that multiple exhibition owners within Singapore, right, were running exhibitions, but they were essentially part of the MICE industry, which is meetings, incentives, conferences, and events. Right, and in the industry over here, we got people who could make events very pretty, but they had no real content. So what's interesting over here is that because Think Tank and we had an editorial group there, they could make things pretty. But because we had School of Thought, we could actually really bring in very strong content. Right, and because we had Food for Thought, we could integrate whatever content that we had in exhibitions into actual institutional spaces. Right, and in doing so over here, it was interesting because roughly around 2014, we began to enter into the exhibition market, right, to grow the portfolio for Think Tank. And we were winning players that were in the space for at least a good 20 to 30 years or so, right, simply because, there was such a breadth of what we could offer. Right there. So there's an advantage over here of building an ecosystem. We had built it within ourselves, but I think within social enterprises, if they could build healthy ecosystems, you could win much more larger deals on the market, not from government. I mean, try not to work with government. Okay, at least we try not to work with government. Yeah. What we also realized over here is exhibitions, however, were just simply events. Right. So let me give you a frame of what we do, and I'll come back to this slide. Right. If you take a look over there, right, around narrative and platform, what you've heard so far is that we believe that changing social issues really is about changing the narrative. But the narrative is changed through conversation. But conversation needs to happen essentially on a platform. Others' narrative can't change. Right? What we're seeing in that particular concentric circles is that center part there, the social problem. We believe that the social problem fundamentally is a narrative problem. Environment, littering is a narrative problem. Prejudice is a narrative problem. Right? Multiple things are essentially narrative problems. And if you don't intervene on the narrative, nothing fundamentally changes. Right? So if the narrative can change, the only way to change a narrative is through a program. Programs are what we consistently attend again and again because narratives are habits, and habits only change through time. Right? So in doing so, we needed a way to make sure that whoever we were working with would regularly come back again and again. Without it, you just can't create that kind of intervention. Right? So what happened over here was that programs were what we really felt, right, what we wanted to build. Right? However, programs are extremely onerous. They're horrible to run, they're very, very costly, which is why people run counterfeit to programs called events. Right? Events give the illusion of change, but they don't do shit. Like this one, you know. So, But events come together, and what essentially they do is that events create conviction. They have a very powerful ability to have you leave an event, right? And if it's well designed, you will have conviction, right, for 3 days. Right? It's like a church camp, you know. I'm on fire for God. 3 days it disappears. Yeah. But in doing so over here, if the event, right, was actually matched together with a program, you actually have sustainable change. Programs tend not to actually have that strong emotional conviction experience. And what we're seeing in Singapore is that there were tons of events, but there were no real programs. So we realized over here that ecosystem, this is how we could then match social enterprise to social enterprise. The ones that had the programs had to be linked to the ones which had run events, right there. And the ones that ran events could create sustainable impact if they had the programs, right? But before the programs even happened, you need the media. Because when the event happens, there will always be a narrative that someone already has. So the prejudice is already there. So they walk in, and sometimes the event is fighting cynicism or it's fighting, you know, apathy, right? So the idea itself was that companies were built essentially on that particular scale. Think tanks set up on a media level, right? Food for Thought was creating events, but School of Thought essentially was the program, right? So internally ourselves, we actually had that particular ecosystem. So in the same way over here, we realized that exhibitions were events. They were creating very powerful emotional experiences, but they essentially weren't programs. So we began to actually go to other organizations and says, would you begin to fund our programs? Right? And I think that's also what created strong sustainable change. This is a zombie apocalypse game that was teaching financial literacy. Very, very popular program back in Singapore. Almost about 60,000 kids have gone through it already. Right, yeah. So I'm going to close in this idea itself. But conversation technology, right, we then realized that we have to start to figure out how do we do this well. Conversation was something we were doing intuitively, but it wasn't codified. So we couldn't scale it or pass it on to other organizations, right? So we had to learn what exactly is the language of conversation. Okay. And then we stumbled upon this, and we finally understood why is it thought collective work was so impactful. Conversations, if done well, fundamentally create trust, but change only happens at the speed of trust, right? And you've seen this, right, quite a few times over there. And we really started to understand over here that if there was a fundamental shift that was happening in Singapore, it's because we were creating social capital, trust networks, right, throughout all these spaces where people were giving either each other's in an abundant culture, right? And in doing so over here, that particular change began to scale. Okay. And the civic action is where it really started. These are real civic conversations where the students who graduate will come back, and then we start taking issues for real. So we start moving out of the conceptual level into actual action. Right? Now, these are ones that have set up downstream social enterprises. So you can see where the network is. Right? We do all the upstream work first, create basically the strong identities and things like that, and then downstream work then happens here. Right? So we don't run the downstream work, but every time they get stuck or they need advice, they come back themselves as an advisory, and that's how the alumni continues to grow. Right? Okay. Okay. So these are the trails that they go through over here. When they start going through whatever civic action, they then head out and they learn about the community. Okay, so let me close. I got 3 last points. Sorry, this is a gratuitous Australian picture. I just thought it was funny you put it in. Okay. Okay, so let me close. It's not that upstream is better, but if our ecosystem doesn't have upstream work, I think it will languish. Right? And it runs out of the thought leadership, and it runs out of basically the people who are developing the strong, sustainable identity. Thought Collective in itself is, I wouldn't say wealthy, but it has enough capital to self-sustain, and it has enough money to fund other groups, right, outside of the government. So I think if a healthy ecosystem also exists, you should have different funding options, right, even for social enterprises themselves. Because the social enterprises themselves have the ability to self-fund, they intuitively understand the work, and they don't give strange criteria as to what you should have begin to hit or don't hit. All right, right. So this is what we've started to do over here for other groups. Okay. We don't believe, honestly, in Singapore, we believe that government is the biggest social enterprise. Right, it is. It manages finance and social motivations at the same time. If you want to talk about big-ass social enterprise in Singapore, then it would be the Singapore government. Right, that is 350,000 employees. Right there. And in doing so, the idea itself is we cannot replace that. There's no way we can actually hit the scale of government. But what we can do is innovate on behalf of. Right. And in doing so over here, if we don't create a strong conversation between the state and the social enterprises over here, again, the scale of impact won't necessarily come. Right. Okay. Actually, I don't have time for this one over here. Do you mind if I just finish and get the points? Yeah, I don't have time being chased. Okay.
Is there any point in asking you to stop at this stage?
No. Yeah, just last time, I'll close this over here. But remember, talk about conversation of impact and what conversation needed to do. We realized over here that we had to build the distinctions, right? And in the distinctions, it was coming through a few things. The government system is under stress, it cannot sustain anymore, and social enterprises therefore form part of that bigger ecosystem, right? But in doing so over here, I'm going to jump to the most important slide, is we have to see this. This is our own training journey in the capabilities that we built. We take our work very, very seriously over here, but I want to see it across the years. This is essentially what we were doing to build stronger capabilities. We weren't running on ideals of business practice. We were learning organizational development, narrative therapy, right? All forms of intervention tools over here. And up to this point in time, it really has made a difference into how rigorous the organization is, right? So in doing so over here, yeah, let's close this one. Yeah, I'm going to close with this. I think we live in very dangerous times, right? And I would ask, I don't know whether this is fair, take your social enterprises seriously. Yeah, they have an immense impact, but you've got to see a much more bigger picture as to where they fit in the ecosystem, not what is it, how do I survive in terms of my work. And if you find the ecosystem, you will survive, right? And you'll do pretty well. And I think that's something that Singapore has successfully managed to do over the past maybe 10 years or so. We built an ecosystem for ourselves. Right. Okay, thank you.
A small gift to you. Take care with that compliment. Thank you. Small token of our appreciation, Tong, for your insights and your energy. You're an irresistible force. Tong is around for the rest of the day. In fact, I think he'll be at one of the tables coming up in the next session, so do buttonhole him and throw him your questions. We are moving seamlessly to the World Cafe's community part of the show, which will occur in that room that we call the Sky Lounge. So, you might be wondering, Brett, which table do I walk to within the Sky Lounge? Now, if you turn around, your name tag, there's a number. What's your name, madam?
Stephanie.
Stephanie, what is the number on your tag? So what you would do is walk through that door to the Sky Lounge and sit down at table number 2. And I know what the rest of you are thinking. That's fine for Stephanie. Mine says 4, or 7, or 9, or 12. The concept remains the same, people. Walk to the table that is suitably numbered. You're about to meet some of your peers and make those connections happen. Without ado, over to you and to the Sky Lounge.
There's a map.
A visual aid for you folks to navigate your way to the appropriate table.
Where would you put a bell?
Where did we get the bell from?
No idea.
I hope it wasn't from the launch big room, if I need that bell.
Oh my god, imagine what.
How do you take the bell that Brett was looking to...
See if I can ask him.
Yeah, but if you put it in physically, you have no idea.
The event's going well. Everyone's just really polite. Hello. What are you doing up there?
Oh, hi there.
Hi.
I'm a bit of a lagger. Do you want me to...
Come on in. I'll take you to your group.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was just trying to...
It's all right.
Actually, nothing to do with work. What did you say?
That's okay. You don't have to announce anything to me. There's no judgment.
No worries. Yes, you're right. I'm sure it's me. I think I got lost between here and the group.
No problem. We've only missed the first round, but we've got another 2 rounds, so you're all good. You'll slip your name. We're just having it.
Should we come back here? I might leave them back.
We're having lunch afterwards.
Yeah.
But then you'll come back. You can come. Come down this way.
Oh, righto.
Yeah. The next session's about panel discussion, so you get to sort of choose which panel discussion you'd be interested in. So it's in, we've got to level 5, or you can come back here.
Okay, thank you.
Is that a Gorman top you're wearing?
Sure is, yeah.
Fantastic. I'm wearing a Gorman top too.
Oh, of course.
What number have you got on the back
I'm
of
a
your
5.
5? Beautiful.
That's a bit fancier than the computer chair, isn't it?
Cool.
So they've got these little lapel mics, which I thought that was such a big session.
Did we want? We can have one more mic. Is there 3?
There's a handheld and a lapel, so maybe, I reckon usually panelists are pretty good at sharing. So if we give the facilitator the handheld and cut these guys the lapels, I reckon that'll be fine.
Facilitator's going to be, is he going to be asking questions of the crowd?
Do you mean for a runner?
If he's not moving it, the lapel could just stay on him, and then the handheld.
I thought you meant should the lapel be used for questions in the crowd, which is actually a good idea. Who's in here? What session is in here? NDIS? Mark. So he could be the runner with the lapel for questions. I reckon we get the panelists to share a lapel, facilitator can have a handheld, and Mark can run the lapel for questions.
Not the handheld.
Not handheld.
Okay.
No. I can give the facilitator the handheld.
No.
Make the facilitator feel like the host.
Okay. Easy. So we don't need an extra one because we've got access to one more.
No, I reckon we're right.
Beautiful.